Yo, what is up guys? My name is Grizzly and today I'm making a Camille top lane guide for Season 8. We're first gonna cover what runes to go on Camille, her skill order, her item build, and then we're gonna go into how to play her. But why should you even pick up Camille in the first place? Well, currently Camille is one of the better carry top laners and she's also a really good blind pick. The only downside with playing Camille top lane at the moment is that she's often banned. Another positive is that she can be flexed to the jungle as well. Overall, Camille is probably one of the best top laners in the game, both in solo queue and competitive play, and she's absolutely a champion you should be looking to pick up. Let's get straight into the rune pages for Camille. There are currently two viable pages, and the first one is the Comet page, which has seen a lot of usage throughout the entirety of Season 8, but recently, since the press the attack buffs, there has also been a secondary page which you can go, which is super good on Camille. It has a way higher win ratio than the Comet page, and a lot of pros, even in competitive players, started taking it, so it's making its way down through the elos, and it's currently starting to be a bit trendier than before. So let's cover the Comet page first though. Basically you go into the sorcery as your main tree and you take Arcane Comet. The reasoning behind this is that Arcane Comet procs off your W and your E, and both of these abilities either slows or stuns the target, which makes the Comet hit 100% of the time almost, so it adds a lot of extra poke damage for Camille's laning phase, and it's decent later on as well. As for the second row, we grab Mana Flow Band because the other two alternatives are quite bad for Camille and she's quite mana hungry in the early game, so Mana Flow Band helps her quite a lot. As for the third row, we go into Celerity. The other two doesn't really do much. Celerity doesn't do that much, but the extra movement speed can be nice and the AD can be good later on. As for the last row, you take either Scorch or Gathering Storm. 99% of the time I would say you take Scorch for the extra laning, but if you're really certain that the game will go to late game and you will need that extra AD in the late game, you can go for Gathering Storm as well. As for our secondary tree, we have two alternatives, but one of them is probably better 90% of the time I would say, and it's going Resolve secondary and taking Bone Plating and Second Wind, or if you need extra all-in power, you can take either Iron Skin or Mirror Shell depending on matchup as well. As for the secondary tree, the alternative to Resolve, we can go Precision as well, and we can take Triumph and Legend Alacrity. Camille is really good with attack speed, and Triumph is also really nice for her team fighting prowess and potential 1v2s, and going Precision secondary gives us that extra attack speed, which can be really nice if we have a good lane. As for the press the attack page, you basically want to run this when you don't think that you need the extra laning power from Comet, or you need to be more of a carry threat later on, because press the attack adds so much dueling and damage to Camille later on that it can be worth the trade-off in many cases. It's basically just weaker early on unless you can get a lot of autos on the opponent, but overall I really prefer the press the attack page currently. I've tried them both out in ranked at about D2 to D1 MMR, and I think the press the attack overall is better even though the early laning is a bit worse. But as for what to pick, you go press the attack on the first row, you go Triumph. Triumph basically is the best out of the three options. Alacrity because attack speed is better than lifesteal and tenacity for Camille. And on the last row, you take Coup de Grace against lanes where you think you can get them low a lot of the time, kind of advantageous lanes. And in close lanes, so for example against an Irelia or Jax, which can be quite bloody, you go Last Stand because in an all-in, Last Stand is better than the other one. So as for our secondary, we go into Resolve most of the time, and we take Bone Plating and Second Wind or Iron Skin or Mirror Shell if we need extra all-in power, and it's dependent on matchup of course whether you go Iron Skin or Mirror Shell. As for your secondary, if you're in a really advantageous lane and you really wanna be the complete power threat where you deal the most amount of possible damage with the rune setup. So as for the other secondary option, we can go into sorcery as well, and here we grab Mana Flow Band and Scorch. You could also go Mana Flow Band and Celerity. It actually doesn't really matter that much, it's whether or not you want the extra move speed or the extra little bit of harass and poke early game. So those are the alternatives for Camille's rune setup. As for the skill max order, it's very simple. You pick your ultimate whenever you can, you max your Q, into your E, into your W. Sometimes it can be worth to max E actually. It's in lanes where they don't really have the mobility or a dash ability to dodge your E, and you really want to force into the opponent, but it's quite risky playing that way because if you use your E all the time in trades, you don't really have an escape if you get ganked. So I would only do this if my jungler is playing around topside, which you can't always guarantee in a solo queue environment. As for the build on Camille, basically it's either Ninjas or Mercs, then you go into Trinity Force, Ravenous Hydra, Sterex Gage, Randuin's Omen, Adaptive Helm, Guardian Angel, items such as that. What can be good on Camille for the extra wave clear pressure, if you really want to push your lane and get pressure on top side, you can go an early Tiamat before you finish your Trinity Force, but you can only get away with this in matchups where you don't need the extra extreme all-in power that Trinity Force enables you to have once you complete the item, so you have to be quite careful when you do this, but I would say if you're really ahead, you can go into Tiamat before Trinity Force, or if you're against like a tank, which you will still win all lanes against, even if you don't like rush a Trinity Force super fast, you can also get away with it and have a lot of pushing pressure topside, and since Camille is such a good roamer, you can then translate that push advantage into roams. As for how to play Camille, the champion is very versatile, so don't feel like you're locked into a certain playstyle. If you're trying to split push and your team is playing poorly around it, just try to go for flanks instead. Basically, you have so many options with Camille that you don't really have to commit to a certain playstyle. For example, if you're playing something, let's do an extreme example, such as a Garen top lane, you really feel forced to force something early game, even if your team is winning or something like that, because the champion is just so useless if you don't win lane. But the thing with Camille is that you can either just like farm lane and scale and do a lot in fights later on, or in certain matchups, so for example against like a tank or some bruisers, you can bully like Kled if you play it correctly, you can bully Darius early on, you can win extended trades against champions such as Renekton. But if you're playing against something that you're struggling to deal with early game for various different reasons, you can just sit back and farm and instead try to look for flanks or even just split pushing, because Camille takes towers so fast. Basically, you have to kind of play a lot of Camille to realize in what games a certain playstyle is better or worse, but generally I would say if you go for the combat page, try to bully lane early on and try to get leads, and if you're playing the press the attack page, try to play a bit more like a Jax, where you sit back a bit more and look for the enemy's mistakes, and then you can completely snowball on them, and if you manage to get a lead with press the attack, there's pretty much nothing the enemy can do, because you can just run them down and deal so much to stand the damage. Thanks a lot for watching this video, guys. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you learned something, please let me know by liking this video. If you have any suggestions or questions, leave a comment down below. But other than that, thanks for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.